Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the show. The speech from the throne was recently delivered, and so joining me now to discuss the speech from the throne and some of the stuff that was in the speech from the throne is John Fraser, who's the Liberal MPP for the riding of Ottawa South. He's also that party's health critic and the House Leader for the Ontario Liberal Party. Jennifer French is the Ontario NDP MPP for the riding of Oshawa, and Dave Smith is the PC MPP for Peterborough Kawartha. So hi there, everyone. Thank you for joining me. John, I'm going to start out with you. I think the biggest criticism that your party and some of the other opposition parties have made as well about the throne speech is on the topic of education and childcare. So I'm just going to ask you, you and your party would like to see the provincial government reach an agreement with the federal government on $10 a day childcare. That's something that your leader's been talking about quite frequently. So are there any other solutions that you see can be implemented to reduce the cost of childcare up until an agreement can be reached?
Well, not really. I think the thing is there are available funds for Ontario families there right now through the federal government. And this government just has to get down and get an agreement with the federal government to get those funds and to get, it's going to take a while to build up the capacity to get there. I think everybody agrees, you're not just going to get an agreement and then all of a sudden you're going to have the ability to do it. You have to train more people. You have to create more centers. So it's going to take a few years to get that done. So the faster that this government gets it done, the better. I think the thing that's really important is that, that the government not try to say that full day kindergarten is included in $10 an hour, $10 a day childcare. That's the kind of sense that I get. That's the kind of negotiation that might be going on right now. Is give us the money and we'll spend it the way that we want to, and we'll actually use it for some of the things we're already doing. Look, affordable childcare is really important for families. Really important for families right now because there's a lot of families who have had to have one person leave the workforce to support them, and it's really important to have full participation in the workforce. And not only so families can thrive, but it's also good for the economy. So that's why I'm encouraging the Ford government to get it done, being critical of the government. They've got some time. They were negotiating before, and I'd like to see it get done sooner rather than later.
Jennifer, I interviewed Andrea Horvath a couple of months ago, and she criticized both the government for their childcare plan and the Liberals for their childcare plan. She talked about how she just doesn't think the government's plan is enough, and then she was criticizing the Liberal plan for relying on the federal plan too much. So maybe speak a little bit about your party's childcare plan and how the government should move forward with making childcare more affordable.
Well, one of the things that we have been seeing, Wyatt, and this entire pandemic is what we've heard referred to as the she session, that there's a need for a she recovery, and that it's not just that childcare is sort of that female issue, but when we look at predominantly women who are unable to get back into the workforce, those who are being just really unfairly impacted by this pandemic and are now struggling as we just heard about the one income or the changes to a family situation. We have to be very intentional with this. For years, the NDP, I'm very proud to be a New Democrat, and for years we have been talking about what it would mean to have affordable childcare. But childcare, paid sick days, all of this is part of that conversation around, being purposeful and not just talking a good game. It's whether the government is talking about what it would cost, we have to look at what it's costing to not have full participation, heading back into the workforce, affordable childcare, safe schools, all of that, the investing in education. This is all part and parcel. So, we have very proudly been consistent in that. I will absolutely direct you to some of my caucus colleagues and the critics on these files who can get into the meat and potatoes of it with you. But we all recognize that children need to be safe. Their families need to have predictable, affordable care, that they need to be looking at public education to be appropriately funded, to know that when they do send, precious cargo. Like we're talking about children. We're talking about, the potential for children to do well or to have a difficult time of things. And so again, we need safe schools plan, including the smaller class sizes, hiring educators. I was getting letters today about we don't have enough EAs or custodians. So I've wandered from where we started because I come to this legislature and to this conversation as a former educator. And so it does, for me, always come back to strong public education, funding strong public services, making things affordable. The idea of people affording childcare up front and then maybe getting the money back at the end. People can't afford that. The average family that is struggling, they need something that they can count on.
Dave Smith, I'm going to go to you next. Obviously, you've heard some criticisms from your two colleagues, not just on the panel, but also in the legislature as well. So maybe speak a little bit about if Ontarians can expect an agreement to be made. Obviously, you don't have control over that. It's some other people in the government, but speak a little bit about whether or not you personally see an agreement being reached.
Thanks, White. I really appreciate that. And I appreciate that you've done this and had all of us on. Well, I'll start off with my two colleagues here. I have a great deal of respect for. They bring forward a lot of really good ideas. Their job is to oppose, to ask us, to hold us accountable and to make us do things that we may or may not have thought of. So it's good that we have that kind of dialogue, and it's great that you have the two individuals here that you do, because I have, as I said, a great deal of respect for both of them. With respect to the childcare issue, all of us agree that we need to have more affordable childcare. It is not affordable in most cases for a lot of families. It takes an entire salary in some cases from one of the family members to pay for childcare, and that's not an effective way of doing it. Yes, the federal government has a program that they're working with to reduce the price of childcare down to $10 per day per child, and that sounds like a great thing at face value. The problem is when you start getting into some of the details on it, and it comes down to, for myself, I represent a riding that has an urban center in Peterborough, and it has a great deal of rural component to it as well. And if we were to take the deal that the federal government has put for us right now, a family in Buckhorn, for example, that's about 45 minutes away from the city of Peterborough, would not have childcare available to them in Buckhorn under that plan. They would have to drive into Peterborough to drop their child off at one of the licensed and approved daycare centers, and then drive back to Buckhorn to go to work. That doesn't work for most families. It might work well in an urban center like Toronto, like Peterborough, like Oshawa or Ottawa, but it doesn't work in the vast majority of the geographic regions of Ontario. So we have been working with the federal government, negotiating with them, to come up with a deal that fits everybody in Ontario. It's one thing to say $10 a day childcare is where we should be at, which we all agree that is a great plan for us to get to, $10 a day childcare. But it has to be childcare that's accessible to everybody. It has to be childcare that's being delivered in a way that provides the different choices for different families. There are families who want more of a family atmosphere to childcare. There are families who want more of a school type of atmosphere. And I'll give an example on that. Montessori schools are an excellent program. And for somebody who's 2 years old, that could be considered childcare. Fantastic program, but it's not available to everybody. And it's not the type of childcare that every family wants. And we need to make sure that whatever deal we sign with the federal government takes into account the needs of everyone in Ontario. We can't have a one size fits all. We can't have the institutionalized childcare as the only option. And we need to make sure that whatever we're doing with the federal government, we do it in a way that's responsible so that all families get what they need here in Ontario.
I'm just going to give you a quick follow-up question, Dave, because obviously I know you probably don't have a whole lot of answers on this, but just obviously a big issue too is just the amount of spaces. I mean, it's not necessarily as big an issue in Ontario as it is in other provinces like Quebec, for example. But does the government have any plans to build more childcare spaces?
Well, it's interesting that you asked that, because we actually added about 30,000 of them in schools as part of the plan since we have come on as the government in Ontario. Yes, we're still expanding that. There are a number of other childcare centres that will open up that are attached to schools, and that's a great way of doing it, absolutely. But it's not the only way of doing it. And we have to make sure that everything that we do serves everyone in Ontario. We can't have it in a position where we've got families who have to travel significant distances to get the type of childcare that they want for their own child.
I'm going to talk about vaccines for a minute, because obviously that was a large part of the throne speech. COVID and long-term care was largely discussed. So, John, I'll go to you next. Obviously, the fourth wave is still here. Cases today were at 476, but there's still 13.3% of the population who has yet to receive their first dose of the vaccine. So many people in the opposition parties have been saying that the proof of vaccination system that was implemented by the Ford government doesn't go far enough, or isn't good enough, or took too long to roll out, for example. So what do you think could have been done differently in regards to the proof of vaccination system, and what should be done furthermore to ensure more people get vaccinated? Oh, I think you're muted. Yep.
There was a fire engine, a fire truck behind me going behind, so I didn't want to interrupt Jennifer. Look, the vaccine certificate or passport, we knew in July we had to do it. The Premier just basically stomped on the idea. So we're 2.5 months late in doing it. And that makes a difference, right? The vaccine passport is a public health measure that does two things. It protects people in enclosed areas. And number two, it actually says to people, you should go and get vaccinated, because that's what we're doing for each other. So it's an incentive for some people to get vaccinated. The most important thing is it keeps areas safe. So it was a tool that we could have used earlier to raise vaccination rates. The second thing is they just made vaccinations mandatory for workers in long-term care, frontline workers, just this week. We've known for months. We should be doing that for schools, for hospitals, for any healthcare setting, for childcare centers. Vaccinations are really important. They're a public safety measure. That's how we all stay safe. So we have to use the tools that are in front of us. And if, with all due respect to the government, they take too long to make the decisions that we need to make in a pandemic where disease spreads very quickly.
Jennifer, I'm just going to go to you next. Obviously, it might have been in June, maybe July, or maybe later. I'm not sure. There was a big disagreement between the Ontario Liberals and the Ontario NDP on mandatory vaccination. So I'm just going to ask you, do you agree with your colleague John on some of the comments that he made? And then do you agree with the way that the government has rolled out the vaccine passports?
What a conversation we're having, eh? Like, we've come a long way from, wash your hands and don't touch your face. And we imagined that vaccines were such a long way off, and it sort of seemed like something out of a almost like a movie, and here we are recognizing that, we dragged our feet in some aspects, that we should have anticipated things in others. My colleague, John Fraser there just was making some sense with what he was saying. And I think that we all recognize that when we're looking at the fourth wave right now and we're looking at the numbers, I think what was anticipated in terms of worst case scenario, I think what we're seeing is that the vaccination rates and that the number of people who've been vaccinated were in the 80s percentage wise, that I think that has made a huge difference, so that we maybe have that hope on the horizon of what that reopening looks like, of sort of that safe and no one will ever say return to normal, but what will that look like? And we all have that responsibility to each other for safe workplaces, to keep vulnerable Ontarians and our neighbors safe and healthy and well. So unfortunately, when you'd started this conversation, we were talking about the throne speech, some missed opportunities there, but we didn't hear a plan for mandatory vaccines, for anyone. And that is something that when we came back at the beginning of this session, we were talking about vaccines. We were talking about being definite and clear. We are and have been talking about safety zones, proper enforcement of vaccine certificates, and really what that consistent approach and clear approach, what enforcement might look like. We've all of us on this phone call, really? Sorry, all of us on the Zoom call have been hearing from businesses, folks who really, they just have been wanting predictability, something that they can plan for, and they're looking for that leadership from this government. I think we need to see that. This isn't about making quick decisions that are the wrong ones. This is about being clear. This is about, listening to the medical experts, and following that, as opposed to kind of being derailed by a very vocal, but the voices of a vocal minority that don't reflect what we are hearing from medical experts and those who would actually get us through to the other side of this pandemic in a safe way.
Dave, obviously you've, Jen said that the government hasn't mandated vaccines, something that was important to the NDP. And then John going more specific, talking about education, or mandating vaccines specifically in education. So maybe just respond to some of the criticisms that your two colleagues have made.
Sure. Let's start off with the vaccine certificate program. John had said that we didn't move on it quickly enough. If you take a look at the measures that Ontario has done, we've had a very cautious approach to it. And if you look at our infection rate, we're one of the best in the country right now. We have done a lot of things that other jurisdictions in Ontario or in Canada did not. You can see a couple of provinces where they lifted the mask mandate over the summer and then they had to reapply it. You have Alberta, which is in a very, very rough shape right now. They have 1/10 of our population, but their daily infections are 2.5 to 3 times what they are in Ontario. Their hospitalization is massive. They don't have anywhere near the capacity that we have. In fact, we have in Ontario, we've taken a number of their ICU patients because they ran out of ICU capacity. So Ontario has done a very, very good job, and it's predominantly the people of Ontario that have done it. It's not government. We can come up with suggestions, we can come up with guidelines, we can come up with regulations, but if the people themselves don't do it, then it's not going to make any difference. The difference has come because so many people in Ontario have actually followed the guidelines from the public officer of health, or the medical officer of health. With respect to the certificate program itself, we rolled ours out 5 days after they did in Quebec and British Columbia. And actually the British Columbia version of it is only a single vaccine, where ours is a double vaccine. So we didn't fall behind others. We took some of the best practices from the jurisdictions as they were developing things. And I'll talk about the web app itself. The version that was first suggested to us was to use the one that Quebec was using. The one that Quebec developed requires an internet connection in order for it to work. And the first week that they rolled it out, they had a security breach on it. So we needed to make sure that we didn't find ourselves in a position where those types of things were happening in Ontario as well. And that's why we developed our own. It was faster for us to develop our own than it was to take something that was already done by someone else and modify it, hoping that we fixed those security errors. We're seeing an uptake in it. What I'm hearing, and I'm sure that both John and Jennifer have spoken to a lot of businesses in their ridings as well. What I'm hearing from the business owners is there's very few people who are objecting to it. When it does happen, it is a situation that has to be dealt with, absolutely. And we don't want to see any of those staff members, any of those workers being abused verbally or otherwise because of something that is required. All of us have to remember that they have a job to do, and they're there doing their job because they want to put food on their table. They want to pay their mortgage or pay their rent. They have expenses that they have to do. And it's not appropriate for us. It's not appropriate for anyone to abuse them. So we can't. I'm of the age where when I was a child, a lot of the conversation was about our duties and our obligations. And what we're hearing now is a lot of conversation about my rights, my privilege. You're taking away my privileges by mandating vaccines. You're affecting my rights. All of us have our individual rights, absolutely. But that right ends when it affects someone else. We should be talking about our obligations, our duties. We have an obligation to make sure that everyone around us is not harmed by anything that we do. We have a duty to make sure we're not doing something that can hurt someone else. I've heard repeatedly excuses like the vaccine is not FDA approved. I don't care. The FDA is a US organization. Health Canada has reviewed the vaccines and they have approved them. And if Health Canada has reviewed it and said, this is a good vaccine, rest assured, this is a good vaccine. I've heard things like it's experimental. Over 4 billion people have received the vaccine. It is not experimental. I've heard people say things like, well, the polio vaccine took 5 years to develop. And my response to that is, in 1950, when they developed it, how many computers were there? And the answer is none. Technology has changed. Our knowledge of science has changed. In 2021, we know a great deal more about science and about medicine than we did 70 years ago. There are a lot of people who, if we were in 1950 still, would not be with us because of other diseases. We've been able to fix that. Polio is virtually gone because of a vaccine. Chickenpox, hardly ever hear about chickenpox because of a vaccine. And when you look at what you need to be vaccinated against to go to school, and you have to produce your vaccine passport to go to school as a student, this is no different. All of us need to be thinking about what are our obligations, what are our duties, not talking about it's inconvenient for me to do something. Let's change that narrative and make it about how do we do more for more so that we can all get through this together.
All right. Well, that was my last question. So thank you, John, Jen, and Dave. And it's been great talking with all of you. And thank you again for making the time.
Thank you.
Quiet.